You are still at your desk when the call comes in, long after everyone else has gone home. You are not supposed to be there this late, not anymore. You transferred out of field operations 2 years ago, requested the desk assignment yourself after the Kabul incident, told your supervisor you wanted stability, structure, fewer decisions that ended with bodies. Most nights you finish paperwork, lock your computer, and leave before the cleaning crew shows up. Tonight you stay because the report in front of you doesn't make sense. And when something doesn't make sense in this job, you don't leave it alone. You're reviewing a financial routing file tied to a sanctioned weapons broker, a man who should not be able to move money through any Western system without alarms going off. The alarms did go off. That's why the file landed on your desk. But the routing authorization attached to the transfer carries a clearance code higher than yours, higher than your supervisor's, stamped with internal approval you can't verify through normal channels. You try twice and same result. Restricted. You sit there for a long time deciding whether to close the file and let it disappear like hundreds of other things you were never meant to see. You know how this works. Some operations don't exist on paper. Some money moves because it has to. You also know that when approvals bypass the chain of command, it means someone wants distance from whatever happens next. You should log the anomaly and go home. Instead, you pick up the phone. You call the only person you know who still answers late-night internal questions without asking why. He's a senior analyst in counter-proliferation, older than you, close enough to retirement that he stopped pretending the system works the way the manuals say it does. You read him the code. There's a long silence on the line, long enough that you check to make sure the call hasn't dropped. He tells you not to touch the file again. He doesn't say it like advice. He says it like a warning. You ask what the authorization is tied to. Another silence. Then he says, if you want to stay where you are, you didn't see it. You hang up without answering. You sit there looking at the screen, at the routing number, the amount, the destination account hidden behind layers of shell companies. You think about Kabul, about the last time you ignored something because someone above you said it was handled. 3 civilians dead in a strike that was supposed to hit a convoy. You signed the clearance based on intelligence you never saw yourself. You told yourself you were following procedure. You don't follow procedure tonight. You access the archive server using credentials you still have from field operations, the ones nobody bothered to revoke because nobody expected you to use them from a desk job. It takes 20 minutes to find the cross-reference. When you do, the file isn't labeled as an operation. It's labeled as a contingency asset. The weapons broker isn't the target. He's on the payroll. You feel the shift the moment you understand what you're looking at. Not shock, not anger, something colder. The realization that the rules you thought you were following were never rules, just boundaries for people who weren't supposed to look too closely. You print the authorization, even though you shouldn't leave a paper trail. You fold it, put it in your pocket, shut down your terminal, and walk out of the building without logging the anomaly. You tell yourself you're going to ask questions in the morning, that this isn't what it looks like, that there's an explanation you just don't have clearance for yet. The knock on your apartment door comes before sunrise. You know who it is before you open it. Nobody else knocks like that. Slow and deliberate, like they're not worried about whether you answer. He's wearing a suit that doesn't look government issue, but the badge he shows you is real enough. You recognize the name even before he says it. Directorate Oversight. Not your chain of command, not anyone you've reported to before. He asks if he can come in. You already know this isn't a request. He doesn't sit down right away. He walks around your living room like he's memorizing it, like he's cataloging the details. He asks how long you've been in the agency. He asks about Kabul. He asks why you stayed late last night. You don't answer the last question. He smiles like he expected that. Then he reaches into his jacket and pulls out the paper you printed. You don't ask how he got it. You don't ask how they knew you had it. You already understand the answer to both questions, and neither one makes this situation better. He sets the paper on the table between you. You weren't supposed to see this, he says. You tell him the authorization code didn't check out. He nods, like that's exactly what he wanted to hear. That's why you're still here, he says. You don't understand what he means, and he can see that. He sits down across from you, folds his hands, and explains it in the calmest voice you've ever heard. There are operations that don't go through the normal structure. Operations that require assets nobody can officially control. Money has to move where it isn't supposed to. Weapons have to end up in the hands of people who will never appear in any report. The agency doesn't run those operations on paper because paper becomes evidence, and evidence becomes hearings, and hearings become careers ending. So they use people who understand the system well enough to bend it without breaking it. People who notice anomalies, people who don't look away. He tells you the transfer you flagged kept an informant alive inside a network that supplies half the insurgent groups in 2 regions. Without that informant, the agency loses visibility. Without visibility, strikes hit the wrong targets, civilians die, missions fail, governments collapse. He says the word collapse like it's a math problem. You ask why the authorization bypassed the chain of command. He looks at you for a long time before answering. Because if it goes through the chain, he says, someone writes it down. You sit there thinking about the report on your desk, about the civilians in Kabul, about the way every decision in this job is supposed to be clean on paper, even when it isn't clean in reality. You ask what he wants from you. He doesn't hesitate. He wants you to stop asking questions the way you did last night and start asking them for the right people. He wants someone who understands procedure well enough to break it without leaving fingerprints. He wants someone who already knows what it feels like to sign off on something that might get innocent people killed. You tell him that sounds like corruption. He doesn't argue. It's control, he says. Without it, the wrong people make the dirty decisions. You laugh at that because you've heard every version of that justification before. Every war, every covert program, every time someone crosses a line they swore they wouldn't cross. It's always the same argument. If we don't do it, someone worse will. You tell him no. He nods again like he expected that too. Then he takes another paper out of his jacket and slides it across the table. It's not an authorization. It's a list, names, dates, locations, operations you were part of, reports you signed, decisions you made. Kabul is on the list. So is the strike in Mosul you thought was clean. So is the interrogation you approved when the clock ran out on the warrant. He doesn't threaten you. He doesn't have to. He just taps the paper once. Everything you did, he says, was illegal because we said it was. You walk away from this, and suddenly people start asking if it really was. You feel the choice closing in on you, the way it always does in this job, not between right and wrong, between bad and worse, between protecting the system and being crushed by it. You ask what happens if you say yes. He tells you the truth, or at least a version of it that sounds close enough to believe. You go back to field operations, but not officially. You don't exist on any roster. You move money, move people, move information. You make sure the operations nobody can admit to still work. You decide when rules matter and when they don't. You carry the risk so the people above you don't have to. You ask what happens if something goes wrong. He looks at you like that's the easiest question you've asked all morning. Then it was never authorized, he says, and you were never there. You sit there for a long time after he finishes talking, long enough that the sun comes up through the window, long enough that you realize you already know what you're going to do, because you made the decision years ago. The first time you signed a report you weren't completely sure about. You pick up the paper with the list of operations. You fold it. You put it in your pocket next to the authorization you weren't supposed to print. You tell him you'll do it. He doesn't smile. He just nods once like a box got checked somewhere you'll never see. By the end of the week, your desk assignment is gone. No transfer order, no announcement, no goodbye meeting. Your access changes overnight. Files open that never opened before. Accounts you didn't know existed show up under your control. You get a phone that isn't in the inventory system and a number you're told never to save anywhere. The first time you move money without authorization, your hands shake just enough that you have to redo the entry twice. The second time, they don't. The first time you approve an asset you know is guilty of things you would have arrested him for a year ago, you tell yourself it's necessary. The 10th time, you stop explaining it to yourself at all. Years pass like that, measured in operations instead of dates. You learn which laws matter and which ones only exist for people who don't know how the machine actually runs. You learn how to bury a transaction so deep nobody finds it unless you want them to. You learn how to read the silence in a supervisor's voice when they want something done but can't say it out loud. You tell yourself you're keeping things under control. You tell yourself the damage would be worse without you. You tell yourself a lot of things. Then one night you're back at a desk again, different building, higher clearance, same kind of file in front of you. Another transfer that shouldn't exist. Another authorization that doesn't go through the system. This time, the code on the approval line is yours. You stare at it for a long time, remembering the night you stayed late because something didn't make sense. Remembering the knock on your door. Remembering the moment you decided the rules were flexible if the consequences were big enough. Your phone rings. You already know who it is before you answer. A junior analyst, voice tight, trying to sound like this is routine. He says he found a routing anomaly tied to a sanctioned broker. Says the authorization doesn't check out. Says he thinks someone made a mistake. You look at the code on the screen again, your code. You think about telling him to log the anomaly and forget it. You think about telling him the truth. You think about how every decision in this job turns into the next decision and the next, until one day you realize you're the person you used to be afraid of. You tell him to leave the file alone. There's a long silence on the line. Then he asks why. You don't answer right away. You sit there staring at the screen, feeling the weight of every operation you kept running, every rule you bent, every time you told yourself it was necessary. When you finally speak, your voice sounds exactly like the man who knocked on your door years ago. Because if you keep looking, you say, you don't get to go back to the life you had before.